So tonight what I thought I would do is a very, very simple wet in wet landscape. And the reason being that I've heard quite a few people recently talking about finding it very hard to work wet in wet and finding it hard to work out how much water to put on the page, even finding it hard to work out how to tape paper down on the page and those sorts of things. So we're going to keep it very, very simple. I'm just going to be using these colours here, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, a mix of light red and cobalt blue, raw umber and burnt sienna. So they're the colours I'm going to use, but you could use any colours that you like. And also, just so you know, right here, I've got a vase that's like pretty big. It's nice and solid. It can't tip over when I wash my brush out. So I have that, and then I have another backup, and I have another backup for fresh water if I need it. So that's always very handy. And I'm just going to do that with a 1-inch hake brush tonight, and then a pure Kolinsky round sable. But again, you could use a synthetic sable if you wanted. So we'll just get started. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see. So what I'm going to do first is wet the page. So what I'm doing here is I'll put this here so you can see, but I'm just dipping this in, scraping on the side a tiny bit, and then starting to put the water on. And then again, and really you can't really, during this process, you can't really over wet it really, because what you can do is put a lot of water on and then flick this. So this brush here, I'll flick it out, and then I'll just take it back across, and that will mop up any of that extra water that's sitting on top, okay? I flicked it out one more time, and I'm just running it back over one more time, and that's when we're good to go. So we'll just bring in a little bit of cobalt blue first. We'll just bring in, and all you're going to do is just bring it in like this. Try not to paint too much, like just like that is totally fine, okay? So we've just done a few strokes here, here, here. I'm going to wash the brush out, and then I'm going to flick it out because it's still a bit too full of water, so I'm just going to flick it out. Or you could dab it on tissue if you wanted to. I'm just going to load up a bit of that light red cobalt blue mix, and again I'm just going to just bring that in. There we go, that'll do. I'm going to wash that out again completely, and I might flick it out a little bit. And if I wanted to, I could start to feather some edges here. So I've got a wet or a damp brush, and I can just, if I wanted to, I could start to feather some of these edges or blend them a bit and do that sort of thing, okay? But let's just leave that for now. I'll just rinse all that out, flick one more time, and then just play with these edges a little bit. Get a bit more water, rinse that out, flick it again, just to soften those edges. So that's it. Let's just leave that like that. And that's the thing with watercolour that you want to do if you're working wet in wet, is not play with it too much. When you put it down on the page, it probably isn't going to look right, but you've got to let watercolour do its thing. So I'll just clean this up around the edges a bit. Move that out of the way. Right, so now what I'm going to do is dry this with a hairdryer so we get a nice clean edge for the landmass we're going to put in. And just one thing that's worth talking about as well is that before you dry it, while it was still a bit more wet than this probably, you can come in with a tissue and just get a bit of a crisper edge, which sometimes is what you have in the clouds. You know, the clouds are obviously, the clouds are the positive white bits. So if you wanted to create some positive edges, some sharp edges, then you could do that. So that's what you could do in the tissue. I'll just keep drying. So just so you know, I'm using Archer's Watercolour Medium 185 GSM, which is not what I would normally use. I'd normally use 300, but actually it seems to perform okay. It does buckle a bit, but on this small size, it's not too bad. So it's obviously a bit cheaper, so that's pretty good. So the next step is for us to put in the landmass, and we'll just do this very simply. So I've got my round sable. You could use a synthetic one. I'm loading up. What I'll do is I'll just show you here. I'm going to use a bit of yellow ochre, the mix of light red and cobalt blue, and then raw umber, and then burnt sienna. So we'll just do this very simply, okay? We'll just bring in a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm just going to load up straight away with a little bit of raw umber, a little bit of burnt sienna, and then we'll just get some water in the brush. And what I would normally do is tilt this a bit, but I've got the bowls there, so I won't. But normally I would just tilt this a bit. And then I can charge an area if I want to. I could just charge that into that area, and then I can wash the brush out. Just bring in some water there, that'll spread that. And just there I could do the same. I could bring in a little bit of water and just leave those little marks there. If I wanted to, I could also charge an area again with a little bit of this. I could just charge that a bit more. I could just bring in a bit more pigment. Just charge that area a bit with some pigment. So really very, very, very simple. And sometimes what you might want to do is just leave some of these marks in places. I think in watercolour they're beautiful. And the other thing is you could start to think about where there might be some light somewhere coming through, like maybe just here. And that might silhouette that and make it darker. Or it might be just putting a little bit of light onto that part of the hill, just a little bit. So you get a tissue, just start here with a dry piece of tissue and then just flick it off a little bit. And that could be giving you just a little bit of a hint of just some light. And turn the tissue again, just to get a bit of a hint of some light hitting. Beautiful. And what I might just do is just lighten that a bit so it's not quite so. There we go. Beautiful. Alright, so that is a very, very simple landscape. We'll dry it. So one last thing we could do, if we wanted to, we could just think about maybe there's some distant mountains off in the background here. So I've just sketched them in with a pencil, and now I'm going to just use a very light mix of cobalt blue. So I'll just water that down a fair bit. I might just add a little bit of that mix of cobalt blue and light red, and we'll just bring that in, okay? So I'm just using the round sable. I've just sketched it in, and now I just need to be fairly quick, like not take too long, because then bits will dry, especially since I've just used the hairdryer. So, and if you want to use a smaller brush so you could just get a little bit more detail, then you could do that. So I've rinsed it out. I'm getting a tissue to just take a little bit more water out of it so it doesn't just saturate that edge. Even though that edge is dry, if I took too much water up to it, it would start to destabilize it. And so that's a little bit flat and a little bit boring. And so again, I might just use a bit of a tissue just to take a bit of light off that peak. And it just breaks it up a bit. Might even have a little bit of mist just coming up from underneath. There we go. Beautiful. So just dry that. So that's the end of that demonstration, and I think what's worth remembering is that when I put this cobalt blue in right at the start, it really, to me, didn't look very good. But you can't make it, you can't paint it with too much detail. You've got to just put it in and then let it move on the page. And same when we put in here and things, you've just got to let it go and not keep playing with it too much. From my opinion anyway, the beauty in watercolour comes when you don't play with it too much and you let it do its thing. So thanks for joining me in this beginner's tutorial in wet and wet painting, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you. Good night.